Hello and welcome to episode 32 of Subplot A Course, a podcast discussing a new science fiction work on the second Tuesday of every month. I'm Stavros, and with me is what some of his students call the specs of math and physics, Charlie. Say hi, Charlie.
Yeah, I even stole a baby for this episode, so enjoy that.
Excellent. Charlie teaches math. Also with me is Vincent, who is also known as the specs of statistical analysis. Say hi, Vincent.
If you're calling me sexy because my name is Sex, I don't know what you're saying, Stavros. I feel a little bit.
Specs, like the character? Never mind.
Oh, got it. Okay, yeah.
Did you read the book, Vincent?
I'm just putting it out there because most of our readers probably did not read the book, so the specs is probably going way over their heads. All they read.
At least now they know.
Vincent reads the books?
Hey, at least I read. I don't listen to these books.
Hey. Anyway, let's proceed. Vincent's an epidemiologist. We're also joined by John, who some call the specs of rocket ships. Say hi, John.
Hello! I have also stolen a baby.
Excellent. John is a mechanical engineer.
That was hilarious. I was like, John, your baby impression is spot on.
Right on cue, too. Yeah. And finally, we're also joined by Adrian, who is widely considered to be the specs of English. Say hi, Adrian.
Yeah, now I've read this book and seen ninth graders. Like, this book is my worst nightmare, seeing like eighth graders take over the world.
Wait, why are we all specs? Why are none of us any other character in the book?
Specs is a smart character.
Any other characters' names in this book?
I want to be Wawa.
Specs is a smart character. You guys are all specs. Anyway, Adrian teaches English literature. And today we're going to be talking about Supernova Era, written by Cixin Liu and published in 2003. And of course, you should be prepared for spoilers. So, the plot. A nearby star has gone supernova, completely irradiating the Earth and fatally damaging the DNA of everyone over 13 years old. After realizing that the adults only have months to live, the various adults of the world train the kids in their jobs and hand over the reins of the planet before completely dying off. The world that remains quickly goes off the rails. The story closely follows the leadership and population of kids in China, where after a short period, everyone loses interest in their keep the world running jobs and co-create a digital blueprint of an impossible world with orbital roller coasters and towns made out of candy, and when that doesn't work out, take to completely gorging themselves on food and become super lazy and disengaged. Other countries suffer similarly, with kids in the United States keeping themselves engaged with small arms fighting games because America. At that point, the world leaders meet to discuss a solution, and the US kids maneuver all countries into one big game, a World War Olympics, taking place on freshly defrosted Antarctica. It ends just about as well as you'd expect, with a lot of destruction and kid death, ending up with the US going off the rails and nuking the other country's headquarters at the violation of the rules. The Chinese leaders retaliate with their own secret nuke, and then everyone just goes home after that. The excitement from the war game starts to wear off, and kids start regressing back to the Candyland state before the US proposes a whole new game with China, the territory swap. This ends up going over well for some reason, and the book ends as multiple countries exchange territory, and a historian looks on from his perspective as he lives on Mars for some reason. So, a lot of exciting things happening in this book. I'm going to just jump right in with just the conceit of this book, which is essentially the supernova threat and the irradiation of the planet and just the effects of that. I will go out and say one of my favorite things up front of this book is the actual premise that the effect of this nearby supernova would have. Easily my favorite thing. Did any of you guys have a similar reaction?
Totally. Yeah, I also thought that it was just the premise for the book was really clever. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and I would say like relatively plausible. I mean, about the effects. I don't know if 13-year-olds and above or below would survive, but it certainly would be quite an event and have a big effect on life on the planet if it did happen.
Yeah, actually, when the book started out with that supernova irradiating the Earth and the going into the aftermath of what might happen, I was already buckled in. I was like, this is going to be a fucking awesome book. Like, this is going to be really interesting. Then Lord of the Flies happened, and I was like, what is going on? Why Lord of the Flies? It could have gone any direction. Like, it could have gone to AI. It could have gone to, like, mutated human beings. It could have gone to all sorts of different things. It's like, nope, Lord of the Flies time. And I was like, oh.
I mean, it's 13-year-olds. The only option is Lord of the Flies. Like, we all know that that's exactly what would happen.
It's 13-year-olds max, I think, right?
That's right.
Oh yeah.
Which means there's younger kids, right?
Yeah.
8-year-olds and stuff taking care of children.
Yeah, that comparison is really interesting. Everyone will make that comparison, right? This is Lord of the Flies. And I'm really curious if you guys feel like that really sort of bears out. Right, because Lord of the Flies is like this image of children like regressing, but it's also a statement of like British childhood, right? Like that, like this is the paradigms that we've taught our children. Like tribalism is like inherent in our society, and I wasn't really sure what to derive from the way that the kids, any of these kids, acted. It was kind of like they were all in like cultured-less vacuums. Essentially, they were all just like kids with a capital K. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Adrian. Because this is written by a Chinese author, so like the whole standpoint of where kids would go, like is written from a Chinese perspective rather than a British perspective with Lord of the Flies. But I think even in the book, as he's writing it, Cixin still references Lord of the Flies and said, "Yeah, nobody got kids' mentality more correct than the writer of the Lord of the Flies." Is essentially what he wrote, and I was like, that explains a lot in terms of where you went with the book. Because like, I mean, the one different thing is that like Cixin's kids, like they apparently go to a play state, like. They say like when all control is lost, all you want to do is play, and the kids didn't care like what happened to each other so much as they got to play. Like they would watch their best friends die, and they'd be like, it's a game. What am I going to do?" Yeah. Like Lord of the Flies was a little more different in that it was more like gangs and cliques, and like it felt a lot more like tribal, kind of like we have the bigger pack, we're going to win. Whereas the kids were like, let's just do it. Who wants to build a roller coaster? Okay, all the roller coaster kids, let's go build a roller coaster. It was very weird. I'm not sure if I got the whole believe the whole premise of just like play is the most important thing, and starving and dying and my friends dying and no responsibility was going to happen even amongst 5-year-olds, maybe 13-year-olds, maybe less.
Yeah, I mean the other kind of cool way this twists Lord of the Flies, right? That Lord of the Flies is on like a desert island where like scarcity is the problem, right? Whereas here they make a very big point. It's like, we've left people in like the most abundant state ever, which explains Candy Town, right? That it's the ability like that there. If you don't want for anything, then is it like our natural state is just like go out, as you say, and play, right?
Yeah, it's like it's very obviously just because of the amount of food and stuff when they have like the crazy feast of craziness, like assuming survivability is not a critical concern, like what would happen. And I'm not totally sure if I bought the the premise that like kids only want to play. Because that's not quite what happens in Lord of the Flies. Although granted, it's been like 20 years since I've read that book, but I mean they resort to conflict as well, whereas conflict only happens in this novel because it's like part of the game, essentially, correct?
Yeah, but Adrian makes a good point that on the island of the Lord of the Flies, it's about there's not enough food and not enough anything for everyone to go around, so the conflict becomes much more prevalent. Whereas when you don't have any worries and there's plenty of food and plenty of shelter and plenty of everything, then it's like, okay, well, we actually really don't have any responsibilities. We do what we want, which is essentially we want to play. We don't want to be garbage men like our dads were. Like I didn't get it. Like the dad who's like, this is my mail route. You're gonna be the best mailman in the world. And he teaches the kid the mail. He's like, I didn't make a single mistake, Dad. I delivered all the mail today. It's like, yeah, how long is that gonna freaking last? Like, there's no way a 13-year-old's gonna be like, yes, my dad told me to be a mailman. I will teach my future kids to be mailmen. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into the strategy the adults have. Although it's not quite clear if that's like a worldwide thing that happens or if it's just in China they taught people to do that. But regardless, we'll get into like how exactly the strategy was perhaps not that effective in a little bit. But I mean, for now, like, so, just to back up a little bit, yes, the premise was very cool, but I personally had a lot of issues or even questions that we're even starting to get into now about how believable the plot was. So as you guys are saying, it's basically, at least in China, the kids take over the jobs of the parents. So initially, like every single kid out there has basically like an adult job. But there are some ways that which it's like gets a little interesting out there. So I wanted to go to John first because John, because of your vocation and things that happen in this book, we've got kids flying fighter jets. We've got kids flying Air Force One.
Trying to fly them.
Yes, we've got kids driving tanks. We've got kids on aircraft carriers. Presumably there are kid mechanics and all that kind of stuff. What's your professional opinion on how well this would have gone over?
Oh, unbelievable. Like, in so many respects, unbelievable. Like, oh gosh, where to begin? Like, some of these things are possible. Like, can a 13-year-old operate an automobile, or a tank, for that matter? Possibly. Some of these devices might be simple enough to be operated by children. I mean,
with 9
they
months of
kind of
prep
made
time,
reference in the book to like fighter jets and such being
right.
Basically very difficult for the children to learn, and I think that was extremely accurate. But even more accurate than that, most of this stuff, even basic devices, like it would be difficult for 13-year-olds. Children. It would be difficult for them to not only diagnose problems with machinery, which is bound to happen, but also, like, some of these things are not designed but for children to maintenance. Like, you have to have a certain amount of strength, you have to have a certain amount of... they're designed for adult humans to maintenance. And I just... The likelihood that they would even be able to maintain these items seems very farcical, in my opinion.
Yeah, even when I'm going through here, I'm more, going through this book, I felt like, the first thing that would collapse would be anything that depends on mechanical maintenance. So, like,
I mean,
aircraft.
To be fair, nothing gets repaired after the parents like teach them how to repair things. For the rest of the book, nobody repairs anything. Everything gets blown up. Everyone who got trained as a doctor never cured anyone. They're just like, oh, my friend just died. See ya. Like, it was just like, oh, okay.
But like electrical power plants, even like nuclear power plants, for instance, require like a relatively large amount of maintenance on an ongoing basis. And I think that it would be inconceivable that even 13-year-old children would be able to diagnose and physically do that level of maintenance. Especially given there's less children. There's only 1/5 the number of people on the Earth. So it's not as if they could deliver solutions that would allow them to work in pairs or teams. The whole thing seems like they would have to. This will go back into my answer in a future segment. But anyway, I just think that it's inconceivable they would be able to maintain most of the adult world's sophisticated technology, even what we consider to be non-sophisticated technology, like water treatment or something. I think that would be a high bar for them.
That really bothered me about the book as well. Like, the one thing that the book takes for granted is that these kids can maintain infrastructure, right? Yes. Because, like, once that, like, the most complicated, mundane thing in our society, right? Aspect of our society. And for the book wouldn't make any sense if the power didn't keep running, right? If people weren't able to, like, repair ships or run ships, refuel, like, tanks, all that stuff. And yet, that's the one thing that the novel has to kind of take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this point where, they're getting these... the kids are just gorging themselves on delicacies and things like that. And I'm thinking, if you guys recall, there's this scene, it's set in this like stadium where people are just like trucking in food and just gorging, and the kids are just gorging themselves. And like, for some reason, the kids that like are driving the transport trucks are the ones that, like, arguably, like, a very mundane, unfun job are just like totally fine continuing to do this job. So it's just like one example of, like, just the critical job. The ones that, like, need the kids that need the mundane jobs to keep the plot progressing are the ones that are still doing their jobs, basically.
They got lucky, like the good kids, all power plants and transportation, and
they're like, wow, this is really fun, guys. I really want to be out there eating, gorging myself in the stadium, but you know what? I'm going to keep my job going on in the power plant.
What does that say about the children of the worker? The workers must have had remarkable children for all of the people who were in infrastructure.
Totally right. Are you guys saying that if you were 13 years old and left to your own devices, you would not be that industrious? Come on.
Well, there's another factor which I was reading the book and I was like, I don't believe that at all. Like, because not everybody has like a 13-year-old child that they can then, a lot of these people in critical jobs, like, they just happen to have like a 2-year-old child. Okay, well, they don't have anyone to train to do their job.
That's what I want, as a toddler working on my power plant. So.
Feels kind of ridiculous that, of course, the infrastructure, I mean, I'm not sure if we're getting to it where it's like the whole progression of like, everything was great, then everyone panicked. I'm like, no, the first thing that would have happened the moment the children were put in charge is like, everyone would have failed and everything would have fallen to crap. Like, it wouldn't have taken until they're bored. It just would have taken, like, 13-year-olds being like, nah! And then that, like, the end of it all.
I just want to bring up again, like, 13 was the maximum age. Like, you got, like, 6-year-olds doing stuff and whatever.
And there's, like, and in the Candy Town stuff, like, it's like they're robbing stores, they're playing with the toys, there's kids driving cars, and I'm like, oh, is this gonna get real? And it's like, kids are jumping out of the way cars. I'm like, no, like, these kids are running over kids. Like, don't brush that under the carpet, guy. Like, this is, like, very G-rated for what is actually happening on the streets here. And then it's like, and then of course in America it's like they're playing with guns, and it's like, yeah, okay.
Did anybody else find this? Okay, so the book also sort of cruxes and around the fact that, like, the parents, the adults misjudged the tolerance for violence and I guess the unappreciation, how low appreciation for life the children had. That was sort of the premise of the book. Allowed them to basically go and have, like, extreme violence and play violence and killing each other. But I don't actually find that to be a very believable sentiment. I mean, I guess the author can do whatever they want because it's their land, but children may not value life as much as adults, and they may not really be able to ascertain repercussions as well as adults. But surely, like, if you're, like, when I was 5, if something really bad happened to them, I would feel terrible. I don't think I would be. They're not all psychopaths. I don't believe that.
You get some of that in the Olympic War scenes, right? Where this compassion between comrades and fellow soldiers was actually kind of a very mature thing to do. But I mean, developmentally speaking, it's not inappropriate. Empathy is like one of the last things that children develop as they grow older, right? Like, you may have an intense bond with someone that you identify with as, like, your friend, right? But on a larger scale, kids are naturally self-centered, right? That's part of their development.
I also feel, though, that I'm a little bit with John's side of things, is that, yeah, it's kids are self-centered, but usually in the context of a well-controlled environment. Like, oh, you took my toy, or I took your toy. Not oh, you cut my arm off, or you shot me with a gun, and someone's screaming bloody murder. Like, I've seen kids when, like, another kid is screaming bloody murder, and, like, the kid's immediately like, oh shit, like, something bad just happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, it's crying because I lost my cracker. It's like, haha, I got your cracker. Like, they know it's not a big deal, but they know it's a big deal when, like, someone's, like, really uncontrollably crying. And I mean, a freaking nuclear war with, like, hot weapons and stuff like that would definitely make a lot of kids cry.
Let me just break in there and say, like, so about the war conflict there, and there's a lot. I mean, the book is not afraid. I mean, there's some, like, I would argue potentially ridiculous stuff that happens, like we were just talking about with, you know, infrastructure being maintained and stuff like that. But there is a point, like, towards the end of the Arctic War where it's describing, like, what's happening with the cold weapons and just kids just murdering each other, and I mean, that was not a good time for me. Like, I do not want to hear about, like, you know, 5-year-olds cutting each other up with bayonets. Like, that was, I mean, that at that point, like, there was a brief moment I was like, this is no longer a sci-fi book, this is like a horror, some kind of science fiction horror situation. It was
dystopian, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like beyond dystopic. Like, like, I was reading, I was like, wow, I might be scarred for life after reading this.
I just don't believe if we put children in a room with, like, real weapons that they would go about just chopping each other up. I just don't necessarily. How are they raising these children? Is what I want to know.
Like a gun. A gun I can imagine because it's, like, accidental, but, like, a knife, like, to actually kill someone with a knife takes, like, not just, like, an accidental stab. It takes, like, multiple swings and like some deep penetration. Like, you'd have to really want to kill someone with a knife. Like, I kind of agree with you on that, John.
Again, as someone who spent more time amongst people close to this age group than you guys have, I'm assuming.
Yeah, probably.
This is not unrealistic.
Jesus. Do you know children? Do you know what they would do?
It was
like last week.
It was about that, like, they're like, whoever was, like, the child psychologist or the sociologist in this role, like, didn't have kids or whatever. Like, nobody passed down this, like, fairly basic understanding of child psychology to anybody. Like, the only sociologist that, you know, Secretary of State in the White House, right? No one else has any kind of sociological understanding of the world.
Yeah, I kind of got that impression too. I mean, and they kind of justify it. And in fact, let's just talk about it right now, because at the end of the novel, it's basically, the novel is pitched as a historical, I don't know, not document, but like just a work based on this like dude that lives on Mars, and he's like looking back at the change, essentially, and he justifies a lot of what happens here as like, well, nobody thought this would happen because nobody knows what the kids' world would be like. And he actually like goes through several things, and he's like, I know this was ridiculous, but who knew that was going to happen in the kids' world? And I felt like it was Liu just like using this character of a historian to just like justify all the crazy stuff he wanted to happen in this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's like, I know you guys were talking about like the Antarctic War stuff being crazy. I'm like, no, like at least one of the children governments would have been bored and been like, let's take over the world and commit like horrible atrocities, not really like knowing the depths of what they were doing. I expected that to happen way earlier in the book with a lot less like organization or anything like that.
Yeah, actually, no, it does get brought up in the whole testing the Chinese children for like the best leaders. Mm-hmm. Like they do that war game essentially to say, oh, who's going to be the future leader of China? And basically, like one team is immediately just taking over everyone. So yeah, it definitely feels like someone would have just been like, hey, take over the world.
Yeah, they all decided to play nice because they wanted to play, I guess, for some reason. But anyway, so let's go back to the premise of the novel. And Vincent, you were looking into this a little bit. We're talking about, so again, back to the premise. This is the supernova that like basically irradiates the world and damages the DNA of people that are over the age of 13. So I heard you have some feedback on this.
Yeah, there's some major plot holes. So Cixin is definitely a very good, I think, maybe science fiction scientist, maybe a physicist kind of, because he definitely gets like the supernova part of things very interestingly down. I think it made sense to me, but the radiation part of things is completely fantastical. So like the premise of like the radiation is that like somehow kids under the age of 13 have some regenerative like X-Men Wolverine factor where like if they get irradiated, they will magically remake all of their DNA and not die from radiation poisoning, which is really weird because in the world that we live in, radiation is way worse for children than it is for adults because children are not fully formed. So you irradiate and damage their DNA. All the damage done to the DNA in those cells gets propagated through future cells as the cells continue to divide and grow and the child gets bigger. So for kids who have like cancer nowadays and they get like chemotherapy, you actually have to monitor them for the rest of their lives because weird things can happen to their DNA and they may get other types of leukemias and other problems. So radiation is not better for children compared to adults. It's way worse for children than it is compared to adults.
That's a little bit of a problem for the premise.
And the second thing is that like radiation also has like a half-life, right? So like Chernobyl, like that accident happened back in 1986, which is like 34 years ago. You still don't have anyone living in Chernobyl. Like Fukushima, like it's estimated that it's going to take 30 to 40 years to just decommission Fukushima because of all the radiation. So like the world that the kids live in is not magically clean like the moment the adults die. It is still fully irradiated and like glowing like to all extents and purposes. So the other issue is that like if you really do believe that kids under 13 can regenerate their DNA, literally next year when those 13-year-olds turn 14 years old, they should all melt and die because they lack that regeneration factor because the radiation is still around. So like basically every year, every generation of 13-year-olds would die and you would have to pass on all the knowledge back to the 12-year-olds. Oh, no. And it'd be like playing this terrible game of telephone where like the adults barely transferred 1% of their knowledge to like the 13-year-olds. Then 13-year-olds transferred like 1% of their knowledge to the 12-year-olds if they even cared to stop playing, and like pass on some information. And you just have the Stone Ages within like 2 generations. Like everyone's 13 years old, 2 years later, everyone's living in the dirt and or dead, and this guy on Mars is on Mars because he got onto Mars like maybe like as an alien and he's just watching the Earth die. It's not because the Earthlings evolved and like got space travel and went to Mars to live there, because there's no way these 12-year-olds would have figured it out.
Hold on. It's not like these 13-year-olds are reproducing or anything like that. We're just gonna be out of people in 13 years.
That's actually quite an interesting point too. Like, they would have to be reproducing.
It's prepubescent Logan's Run, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my gosh.
It's pre-reproductivity Logan's Run. No.
Okay, so actually, I was hoping that Charlie could weigh in on this. Like the radiation that we're talking about. Like, are we talking about the fact that the radiation would actually cause material on Earth to re-radiate, like thereby making it fissile?
Continuous, like the half-life of the radiation. So like if the radiation, like when you have a radioactive disaster or something like that radioactive material decays slowly, right? So I'm assuming that this supernova is causing damage to things and causing things to be irradiated, I guess. So I don't know if there's a half-life to supernova radiation.
No, I think this is like because of the gamma. I think it's because of the supernova. It like releases a gamma ray burst or something like that, and thereby irradiates the material, but doesn't make it then the material also re-radiate.
There's no persistence, you mean?
Right.
Well, it does say that it's there long enough to radiate into like the neutrino detectors underneath the Earth and stuff like that. And they do mention like it's still like radiating out of the Earth, hence everyone getting it regardless of where they were on the Earth. I'm like, if it got that deep and is radiating that long, like I kind of go with Vincent's thing. I mean,
it was the fact that it went for 7 days. It was like 7 days is the length of the burst. Yeah. So the fact that the whole planet was rotating, they all got radiated.
It's like a rotisserie chicken.
That's the way that I read it. You're absolutely right. I don't think it makes any sense if the whole Earth was re-radiating. They would all be screwed, probably.
I mean, the main concern is like so to me, when I read it as someone who doesn't know anything about radiation or physics, it sounded like the Earth got blasted with a wave, and then the wave is gone now. So older kids or people would persist. But is that not the way radiation works?
That is the way some radiation works.
Yeah.
I see.
Because, for instance, we irradiate food, for instance, to make it sterile.
Right.
So, like, if you take a batch of tomatoes and you expose it to radiation, then you would make that clean and sterile. But you eat the tomato, it doesn't mean that you're not going to die because it's going to re-radiate inside it. Gotcha. It's the source of the radiation you've removed, essentially.
But I guess another point that I didn't make, which is that like the DNA damage, it propagates through generations as well, is another thing to keep in mind. Is that like those 13-year-olds probably have, like Fukushima survivors in particular, have like high rates of cancer, right? So those people then having offspring with other cancer-disposed individuals would lead to a very, very high prevalence of cancer amongst the children's generation and the children's generation. It'd be set for the premise of a very unhealthy population that would not have very much longevity in my mind if you didn't have a baseline healthy person. Either that or just like the X-Men or like some weird superhero society would come up for.
We're all going to be X-Men is what I'm getting out of this.
Yeah, X-Men are dead. Like you would be.
I like these odds.
And there's just the part of me that's like, if there's that much radiation to cause that much cancer, that much instantly, like, what's that doing to the atmosphere? Like, I feel like
Aurora Borealis every day.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
I don't know if we have a lot of experience suffering through supernovas, so to me, like, I could see this being a potential plot hole. But hey, I'll give the author a little bit of credit. It seems like he wants to get this story on the road, and it seems at least somewhat plausible to me.
I will say also that the Doomsday Clock thing was one of the best parts of this book, right? Like watching as like all these little enclaves of adults like slowly die out on this clock, right? That really caught me.
Really? The best part of the book, Adrian?
Yeah, this is like fascinating, right? In terms of like, it's like touch a person. Yeah, it was wonderful to see.
So they're like, oh, everything's going fine. The kids are okay. And then like the last day, everyone just kind of like, it's like the central government's like, and then we stayed up for 48 hours just watching that last dot. I'm like, dude, you kids are in charge. Do your jobs.
I thought it was great pacing, to be honest. I thought I was reading a thriller. It was really, I liked it. It was a lot of drama around the end of the epoch.
My least favorite trope, like, it's the reason I kind of hate The Lion King, is when kids do something stupid and ruin everything by doing the exact thing they were told is the one thing they're not supposed to do. It's like, in like horror movies where it's like, we gotta hide in here, and the kid's like, but Dolly, and like attracts the monster. I'm just like, nope, you killed everyone. It would have been better if only you had died. And like half of this book is just like, that's just everybody.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about Americans in this book. As we're all Americans, everyone on this show is an American. And they kind of get some interesting light painted on them in this book. like as we mentioned, the American kids, quote unquote, have fun in their Candyland phase by all getting guns somehow. I guess I shouldn't say somehow because there are a lot of guns in this country. So they get the guns that are already here, and then they just start murdering each other by playing more games. Not only that, but the president is a charismatic idiot, essentially. And his chief of staff is basically an evil dude. I kind of get I just have this like mental image of, I mean, he must have been described in the book just like sunken cheeked, depressed looking guy, but he's also a kid, which is just really strange. Anyway, they've modified the Constitution so that the chief of staff is not selected by the president, which seems crazy. Maybe it would help us right now. Basically he's like controlling things behind the scenes, and the president's a charismatic idiot, and like they, basically cause a lot of the violence in the book by suggesting the Arctic War Games, and so on. So, maybe you can get a sense of how I feel about that, considering by the way I'm describing. But what did you guys think?
Stavros, I mentioned this to you before. I fully expected 200 times more of that going on in this crazy altruistic world that Cixin paints. Like, could you imagine if the current president had the opportunity to like put his kid into power, and all of his generals could put their kids into power? Like, you would imagine there'd be so much nepotism. The fact that they had only one kid get forced into government is like a freaking miracle, like in my mind.
Oh yeah, like when they got to America, because in the first half of the book, like the Candy Town, I was just like, dude, this would be way worse. And they got to America, and I'm like, all right, like, are you making some kind of like hilarious political statement here? Because this would be happening everywhere, except in like probably even more horrible ways, because kids are kind of evil. That's it.
So, did your guys' version of the book mention like when he was writing this?
Oh yeah, the afterword.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So
timing-wise, it's right after Chernobyl. It's like 1989 or something like that, or 1989.
Yeah, but also Tiananmen Square, right? That's like
Tiananmen Square too. Yeah.
So like one thing that caught my mind, and just thinking about like how the absence of like video games in this entire world, essentially, like I mean they're mentioned, but their impact like of virtuality is not really a thing, right? And that feels very true of like the 80s versus now, right? That there are no clear sort of outlets for kids' energy that are actually more attractive than like using actual guns, right?
Right. So you think that's a product of the time that it was written then, essentially, right, Adrian?
I can imagine, yeah, because like I mean, why wouldn't kids just play like Modern Warfare all the time, right? If they had the chance to, as opposed to like actually going out and firing guns at each other.
Well,
I
okay.
Respawn in Call of Duty.
I'm gonna have to push on this because I really want Adrian to like, I want him to tell me that this is like, I'm so naive about children. Am I that wrong that like even if 5 to 13-year-olds are let's say they don't have a lot of empathy. Let's say they're unempathetic people and they just don't care that much about people who are not in their direct, circle of friends. Okay, but they also do understand consequences. I mean, a 5-year-old does understand immediate consequences, not future consequences. Like if I shoot my friend in the street, or if I shoot this other person in the street, I'm not gonna be able to play with them later. Like that would really, if we just let them all have guns, they would all just murder each other. Really?
That's what I was saying is kind of stupid about this. Is I didn't feel like kids would play this game with each other for exactly that reason. So either A, this would stop and like everyone would be just kind of pathetic and sad and playing games or whatever, or B, they'd just be like, let's kill the other people because, that would be the more fun game and it's people they don't care about.
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics makes sense to me, right? The Final Antarctica, that makes sense to me because you abstract the other person to the point where it's like, it's not your friend, right? It's just some person you're kind of playing this game with, and if someone gets hurt, that's just kind of what happens, right? I do think that there is something sort of really problematic. I mean, definitely kids this age have poor impulse control, right? So you can imagine somebody like shooting somebody because they get mad about something, perhaps, right? But like, in terms of a game, you're right, that's a little bit less believable.
It's weird because the kids have so much control too. Like when the Chinese delegates visit the United States government, for instance, they're having a war game in the streets, and they're like, "Oh, someone from the government's coming through. Okay, time out, time out." It's like, wait, you have this much control to come up with rules to have timeouts and not shoot each other. So you also have no control in terms of like, oh, the ramifications of shooting each other. It's like, oh, we have very strict rules. that we follow.
No, I mean that's utterly believable though, right? Because like when you have like this is the primary paradigm that kids understand the world is through games, right? And games by their design, right, don't have real world consequences. This is like basic ludology here, you know, that in order for it to be a game, there shouldn't be consequences. Like, that's the reason why like professional sports is kind of ambiguously a game, right? Because when you're a professional, there are real world consequences to winning or losing. Right, there's a nice association that you can make there between like playing a game versus what's supposed to happen in the real world.
Yeah, I think that's why I got tired of the whole like they're obsessed with playing games. It's like kids are smarter than that. They're not gonna have like murder time games. Like it's either going to be like Lord of the Flies complete murder time, or they're gonna figure out something else.
So I mean, two things that help me reconcile that a little bit. Number one, it's the novel says these kids like drinking all the time.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. They just get hammered.
And they just like start wars, like completely pointless, dumb wars. But it wouldn't be like organized like this. You know, nobody'd be like, "Oh, let's line up the tanks." They'd just be like, "Get in the tanks, let's go," and like head down to whatever country's next door.
You know, but the other issue here is that, you know, this novel was written in a time of like behavioralism as the primary understanding of how to raise kids, right? So what happens when you remove any apparatus for enforcing consequences, right? Like if you don't have parents that have a judicial system that works, then what do you have, right? You just have pure force on force is the thought, right? That the only corrective to a child misbehaving is to exert force against that child.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So, do we think that to some extent, when I was reading this book, I kind of really thought that the children's world was going to sort of follow more of the adults' world. Like the adults, despite all their best efforts, essentially the children were going to go ahead and inherit all of the same faults and predilections, except with less restraint, because children don't have as much restraint.
Yeah.
But you made a really good point, which I just embarrassingly didn't think about until you mentioned it, which is that the children lived in a world where there really wasn't any need to do anything. They had, extensive resources available to them, so there was really no need for them to do anything except for play. And in that relationship, there would be no need to fight over anything.
Well, that's where I thought kind of 2/3 point of the book would go to. It's like, all right, they discovered they've had this world of plenty, so they stop working, but then eventually that starts running out, and then they realize they have to actually go do something, but instead of doing their jobs, they start conflicts and that sort of thing. But instead it just turned into this weird America wants to have war Olympics in Antarctica, and I was like, okay.
I think that explains the ending though, right? Because like once you remove once you decontextualize that plenty, once you remove the child from the home, then they are forced to grow up.
So let's talk more about the ending specifically, because I'm not totally sure that was what happens at the end, Adrian, although you feel free to argue against me here. But I mean, essentially, I got the impression that there is this territory swap that essentially magically fixed everyone's problems, right? And they do this, China and the U.S. do it first. I'm still not sure of the reason. I'm still not sure of the reason. This is a thing that happens for some reason. And I think the kids all think of it as a game because they get to go and essentially explore and get used to being in the other territory. So I want to let me go to Adrian first, just because we're talking about it already. Did you not feel like this is just another game for these kids to play that happened to be big enough to satiate their need for having play fun times?
I mean, the real reason I don't think that is because of the rules of the game, which was that they could take nothing, right? They made a big deal of that people could not take their cultural treasures. They couldn't even take grass from the ground, right? That the rules of this game are you have to completely divorce yourself from any kind of history except that which you carry with you, right? I agree, it feels really fast and a really sort of odd resolution to the novel, that you just have this guy sitting in the Oval Office thinking of the solution and speculating that's really great, and then everybody in the world starts doing this thing, right, in order to give themselves a sense of novel excitement and also to kind of extract themselves from this stupor of being in a place where your parents plenty still sort of influences you, right? But I guess it makes sense in that weird way. I don't know. It feels like it makes conceptual sense, but not like plot sense in my mind.
Yeah, because I feel like as you were talking about in terms of would it work and does it work as kind of an analogy for something about growing up? It's like, yeah, it works in that sense, but in terms of like the world plot, it was like just kind of there out of nowhere. Especially the fact that like the other countries would agree to it.
And also keep doing it, right? That like every country in the world would do this.
Well, I figure like once one country does it, like, oh, America and China did it, let's find another country to do this with, because it's like kids are bored and they're like, they want to get in on it. Like that part I could buy. It's more so just the original first time, like A, coming up with it, and B, actually both sides agreeing to it.
But they make a big deal about how this is not fun, right? This is actually really sad. Like they talk about like how people, when they're adults, they will sort of look back at like the little bit of dirt that they carried with them from China and feel this like longing for home. Like how miserable it is to go across the ocean in these giant container ships to go to the other country. Like there's no fun in this. That's what bothered me. Like I don't understand why any of these countries would agree to this game, because it's all delayed gratification.
Why would they leave Candytown to do this?
Yeah, the justification is quite weak on that one. Like the Americans, the justification was that, oh, we're a pioneering spirit and therefore moving to another country will break other countries, but it will make us thrive because we grew up with our genetics as the wild, wild west, which I didn't buy in the first place because your genetics already got irradiated. So forget that. But it was it was kind of like this very weak argument. Like, oh, if we go, like, we can't win against China in the Olympic Games. If we make China swap places with us, like, we will completely screw them. And I was like, the one major reason why I didn't believe that the Chinese would swap was not because of the cultural relics and not because of the parents' things, was because the AI, there's artificial intelligence that the adults have left behind for the Chinese children to run the whole country. Like when the Doomsday clock ticked down and then everyone like panicked and all the leadership was going to leave and just be like, I don't want to do this anymore. They were like, oh, actually AI, can you do all of our jobs for us? And he was like, yes, I'll handle all the calls and do all the stuff. And then the Chinese kids are like, oh yeah, let's just go to another country where there isn't an AI that we probably could run, because it probably only like responds to English people or American people. And it's like, let's give it all to Americans. Like I didn't get that at all. It's like the only reason why any of you are alive is because that freaking AI is saving your butts.
The AI saving them from the collapse was the part where I was just like, and nothing matters, because you just took the most interesting part of the book, which is how do kids deal with the fact that everything's falling apart, and just gave them a magic key out.
So you mentioned Chinese, and maybe I missed this, and you guys can fill me in on this. So, right, the Americans say, like, oh, it's our pioneering spirit. We need, like, a new frontier to go to. But Spec says, like, you know, the Chinese draw their strength from their connection to their place, right? That they are best when they are at their home, this place they have been, you know, a civilization longer than almost any other civilization has existed. So I never understood, like, why the Chinese would give up that sense of place.
Yep.
Like,
they got pressured into it, I think, right? Because they knew if it got out.
But Spec says it's like a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant idea in terms of like motivating the kids to like kind of get off their butts and actually do something. Right. It's the argument in the book.
It's just like he makes that argument about how China draws its strength from its land. I couldn't get his logical leap from those two things. Like, why would you play to America's strength and to Chinese weakness in that exchange?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Good question.
Because China has like a bajillion more children than America does, and therefore they could take advantage of all the crazy American resources that we have.
I don't know, one-child policy, man.
I guess he does mention that, right? Like America has like more than China does, right? Like that's part of it, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah. But so let's move on to our contest topic while we still have time. So let's play a little game. Each of us is going to suggest a way in which the worldwide strategy of adults could have been better in the lead up of the changeover of the world to the kids. This is assuming, of course, full 2020 retrospection, considering what happened in the book. So how do you handle it? And then, of course, after this, we will vote and see whose approach perhaps is the best one here. So I will go first. My approach is a little bit simplistic, honestly. I think a lot of the reason why things kind of go to hell in the novel is because the kids are kind of given too much responsibility and too much deadly force power too fast. So my personal approach would be, you got to go in. You can't just expect all the kids to just magically just do all the jobs of all the adults. I would lock out certain more difficult, technically difficult components and deadly components. I would lock that out to the kids and perhaps start gradually unlocking them as we get kids that are older and have more, they can handle more responsibility. I feel like, I'm not saying that would solve all the problems, but I certainly think that if you do this gradual unlocking as you have kids that are actually reaching maturity, you would have less just pointless murder because you would have these people that have actually developed empathy. So I would definitely say that you're definitely going to be expecting just an initial set of destruction and rioting or whatever, but you've just got to expect that. You've just got to rebuild. So that is my pitch. Let's go to Vincent. Vincent, what is your pitch here? How would you adjust your strategy?
All right, so I have one pitch, but let me make a alternate pitch, which will only take 5 seconds, which is do nothing, because at the end of the book, humanity somehow is on Mars within 30 years of like the children like taking over, which means
that's a good point.
Justify the means.
Yeah.
Humanity did not die. You're on Mars. Do nothing. The book was just fine the way it was. Sacrifice a few generations, but that's a-okay. But
okay.
That joke aside, which is semi-serious, let me elaborate on what I guess I would do if I were an adult, and maybe if I didn't have like 40-20 vision, like, because I feel like knowing that they were on Mars is like a little too much vision. But
okay,
I think if I were an adult and I had an all-powerful AI or something like that, I think I would start with an AI government that transitioned to a human government as children became more mature. And the way I would probably do is that the AI governs, I'd probably move most of the children into a relatively well-controlled, super like Big Brother kind of city, and have the AI govern it essentially, so that you wouldn't have kids all over the country just dying or doing crazy things. You would keep all the kids in a place and give them the semblance of some sort of adult, i.e. like, you know, Big Brother on a TV screen or something like that, where it's like, you know, this adult figure who is telling them what to do and why they should do things. And based off of the children's performance and a lot of Big Brother kind of monitoring, if certain kids show that they are more bullies, or the kids are more leaders, or kids are more introverts, or kids are more scientific, like it essentially would unlock certain like pathways, like career pathways for those kids based off their talents and or personalities, such that, you know, if you were shown to be like a mass murderer, like you glass ceiling out as a janitor or something like that, I'd be like, no, you're not going anywhere in the society. But if you're actually like, you know, altruistic and very interested in like, you know, leadership, and you're technically oriented, then you might go up and up the ladders in the ranks. And as you got older, like this kind of passive observation system would essentially eventually unlock supreme leadership for a handful of kids. And the moment you reach the highest level of this quote unquote game, the AI would divest all control and give full control back to the kids, and like be a servant of the adults essentially at that point, meaning that there would be a seamless transition back to humanity. So it wouldn't be Big Brother all the time, but you at least would have a functioning government at some point. That is my theoretical idea.
I like it. So like an AI, you know, give control to the AI for a certain amount of time.
AI mom.
Got it. All right, cool. I love it. Let's go to Charlie. What's your pitch here?
So, assuming there's no magic self-aware computer to fix all your problems, you know, stupid, robs the book of any sense of tension that we really had. Anyways, but so they make the point that like what percent of the human population is left? Like first thing it would do is like
1/5 is left.
Yeah, like a fifth. Like they're essentially asking a fifth of the population, all of which are tiny people and tiny children that can't do anything really, to maintain 100% of the infrastructure that is designed for like 100% of the population. Like centralize them into like a smaller, well-developed part of the country. Let there be like for like kids who have to manage the water plants, let there be redundancies. Yeah, I know kids don't get along necessarily, and that could lead to its own issues. But it's better than being like, hey kid, you're responsible for this entire group of people, and then like that kid having like a sobbing fit and everyone getting poisoned like happens in the book before the AI magically saves them. So it's like, just basically centralize all the kids, do obvious things like, I know this is America, and America is awesome and all that, but put the guns away. Like, it's the one time I'd be like,
from our cold dead hands, idea. Charlie.
Yeah. Or you know what? If you don't want to join the centralized whatever, and you want, Joe Jr. out farming his farm in the middle of nowhere by himself, go ahead. It's your choice, right? For everyone else, no. And finally, if you're gonna drop your kid off someplace, let's do it before you leave. Don't just leave your 4-year-old by itself. And also, give them the phone number to someone who can immediately help them. Not the central government of the giant country. Why does the 4-year-old call the Beijing central government when she's hungry? How did this happen?
I feel like we've triggered Charlie. What's
the moment the clock turned off and everyone was calling Beijing? I'm just like, what did the adults do? Why? Also, no doomsday clock. You're just asking for kids to freak out. You just say, we're going to leave on this day. We're all dead. Don't worry about it. Take care of each other. And you're gone.
Okay.
Maybe leave a clock there and tell them when to get it later in 5 years when they're adults.
Charlie, but are you okay?
Anyways, I'm okay.
Okay, got it. All right, so centralize the population, store the guns, don't leave kids at home. Got it.
Yeah, drop them off at the daycare. That's headed by the kids who aren't going to die.
That's a good point. All right, let's go to John. John, what is your pitch?
Now, my pitch is that I think that I relate a lot, so I'm not going to repeat. I'm not going to tread the same raw ground that Charlie just plowed. But it's true that the adults were basically setting up the children to maintain the civilization that they had created, which was not going to work for so many reasons that we talked about already. The fact that it wasn't designed for children, the fact that it was designed for 80% more people on the planet, so forth and so on. So, but to avoid Candy Town, I actually think that the adults should have spent the remaining many months of their lives returning the children to a pastoral society. I think that's the only way that this would have worked, essentially, is to remove the technology, which I think probably would have happened anyway, because they probably wouldn't have had electricity. Basically, you have to return them to a pastoral system and assume that at some point in the future, they'll be able to use written knowledge, essentially, to pick up society. It would be a huge blow to society, to civilization, but I think that it would probably be more stable than what they left them with.
Till the Russians ride in with their tanks and their help.
I like it, John. It's pretty similar to my idea. Basically, I can see an argument there. Okay, Adrian, do you have a amazing pitch to wow us with?
So I have two. I mean, one I think is a synthesis of what you guys are saying, like the Horizon Zero Dawn idea, right? Like you have this AI that's able to sort of coordinate everything, but at the same time, you have to give allowance for human development, right? So you allow humanity to regress back to, as you say, a pastoral sort of form, but you have this AI helping to orchestrate, right, everyone's sort of uplift, right? But I do think that you have to give allowance for, these parents who, number one, don't want their kids to suffer and have to go through what amounts to a kind of genocide, right? Like making kids regress socially to the point where, you are thousands of years behind and you want your kids to have all this technology, right? And I think one major problem in my mind was just that you allowed, 4, 6, 8-year-olds to have as much social weight as 13-year-olds, right? That despite putting those in charge, right, you didn't really have any kind of structure of command on the way down, right? And I think just making sure that only kids that were 13 had any kind of say, right, would probably at least help things a little bit along, right? To organizing, at least let the most mature people in the room have their say. And put structures in place to sort of allow enforcement of that might be helpful.
So you're saying have the older kids get more social say is what you're saying? Yeah,
totally. I mean, if you think the whole conceit of the MMO, right, that is one of the first movements in this novel is just well, every voice has its sort of say. It's why should a 6-year-old have as much say as a 13-year-old? That bothered me so much.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Is that
you
not
let
a
your
commentary
met-
from the author on the difference in the society, the Chinese government society? I saw it as like sort of a pitch for free government and democracy to some
I
extent.
saw it the other way actually. I saw like where the government kids go into the MMO where like all, like the kids together have the voice where like we want Candyland, and the government's like you guys are stupid. To me, it's like the government's like government knows best. All the other kids are idiots. Anyway, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yep.
No, yeah, I was just like it makes it really hard to kind of understand the Tiananmen Square influence, right? That this notorious sort of student movement, right? That was a major critique of centralized government. Like is this seen as problematic or is it seen as sort of a way forward, right? Mm-hmm. That is he advocating the children's world, right? Like once we free ourselves of all the baggage of history, right? That we are capable of great things, or were these kids just kind of stupid for a while until they figured things out? And I think like I guess the other thing which comes to mind, which is utterly unrelated to my answer, is just like what happens when these kids hit puberty. It's like that's one of my major like things in my head. It's like yeah.
Definitely a problem.
Yeah.
All right, so let me review all of the options here. So we've got my suggestion was basically lock out areas of control and deadly force until the kids get older. You've got to expect initial riots and destruction, so just unlock those areas as the kids get older and rebuild from there. Vincent's idea was Skynet, so give the AI government control. Move the kids to city with the AI looking over it. You give them, it's like a meritocracy, and eventually
let Arnold run the kids.
I'm sure the AI will definitely relinquish control when the
Kindergarten cop.
Charlie's suggestion was basically centralize the population in one part of the country, get rid of the guns, don't abandon your kids, and don't have a doomsday clock. John's suggestion was just allow a regression to pastoral society, remove technology, and eventually regain access to knowledge or to tech with written knowledge. And Adrian's, kind of there's an AI element there, allow regression and redevelopment, and then give a weighted voice to older kids. So definitely a cornucopia of options. I am going to go with my vote. I am going to go with actually Adrian's idea. I like the idea of weighting the older kids with more of a voice in the government, even though there's an AI element there. Doesn't sound as Skynet-y as Vincent's suggestion. So let's. How about you, Vincent? Which suggestion are you going with?
I'm going to go with John's. I like the idea of just having the kids do the right thing, hopefully.
Okay. Fair enough.
That was my idea. It really was. Just do the right thing, kids.
Do the right thing, kids. All
Don't
right.
fuck up.
All right, Charlie. How about you?
Sure, I'll go with Adrian. That sounded like a decent compromise.
Okay. I like it. How about you, John?
Oh man, I'm gonna have to go. I really wanted to go with yours, Charlie. I really did. From my cold dead
mine's
hands.
based on the idea that there is no AI. Like, remove that conceit completely. Like if this happened in the real world.
Let's rewrite the book, is what I would summarize your idea as. No, I'm gonna have to go with Adrian's idea. I think it's the most balanced and achievable one.
Wow. Insurmountable lead, Adrian, but where would your vote be cast?
Probably Charlie, because I would hope that like the crisis of the world, right, would make people come together from different countries. Like that's one conceit, right, that every country pursues their own individual option in 6 months, doesn't coordinate, even though they somehow allow for somebody to be the head of the UN in that time, right? Like there's no attempt to like actually like make a centralized solution for all of the world's children. Like that feels kind of out of hand to me. Like I would have liked for people to have made more planning in that direction.
Oh, I wasn't suggesting for all the world. Like that would be cute, but that wouldn't happen. just for your country.
Very good.
All right. Well, congratulations, Adrian. You've broke Vincent's winning streak in this game with.
Did I have a winning streak?
Oh, I think so. Yes. I think...
rap battle. I won one. I think that was a winning streak of one.
Congratulations, Adrian. We're doing your suggestion on if we could do
I win
nothing. You win our admiration. All right. let's go to our.
I win.
You quote unquote won with their big air quotes. All right, let's go to our final segment here. Best thing, worst thing. Thing you like the best about the book. Thing you didn't like the most. I will go first. I really liked the premise. I feel like the situation of a supernova, very local to Earth, is incalculably small chance of that happening, but also very interesting to think about what would happen. I really loved the portrayal of how the government was trying to handle the preparations. All very interesting. Unfortunately, right when the Doomsday Clock ran out, then I just started not liking it. Just so many strange things started happening with the plot. All things we've talked about. I guess the worst thing I was saying is just the believability of the progression of events. Going from the maintaining the mechanical stuff, and the MMO we've talked about. Like, I work in video games. Good luck having an MMO that can handle 200 million players simultaneously. That will never happen. Along with the portrayal of like how evil the Americans are and like how gun happy, like just one unbelievable thing after another. Topped off with the strange resolution. Just, I guess the worst thing, just the progression of the plot was just not very believable to me. All right, let's go to Adrian. What do you think? Best thing, worst thing?
Best thing for me, I think, was definitely the Doomsday Clock part of the novel. I think that was really believable and just a really arresting sort of moment for me, like watching as all of your parents and every adult, every kind of lead influence that you may know dies off in some far off place. Like, that felt believable and also like really touching and altruistic. I think what's tied for me there also, I guess, is the Olympic Games. Like, I feel like that is something that a kid would come up with, like some sort of organized competition for how having children divvy up the world. I think the ending really disappointed me just because it's so fast. It doesn't really feel like a resolution, even though, again, like it makes a little bit of retroactive sense, and just was very unsatisfying.
Okay, good feedback. How about you, Vincent? Best thing, worst thing?
This book has so many good highs and so many low lows. I feel, and the problem is, I feel like the book starts really high and then just progressively gets lower as it goes along. So the premise, of course, is really great. The children's reaction to all the news, the adults' reaction to the news, it leaves you feeling very like worried because, like, it's kind of like disaster preparation, and like seeing how everyone's reacting to it, and like, albeit in a potentially unrealistic manner, is just like, it makes you feel like, oh, if I were in their shoes, like I would also be very anxious. Like, I actually don't know what I would do if I were irradiated and my kids were somehow going to survive. Like, it horrifies me, that idea. But then after that, it just becomes so. It's not that, like, the kid's mentality is unbelievable, but there's so many plot holes as you go further along that, it's like, jumping from like, the kids having these play wars, like where they use nuclear weapons, to suddenly everyone being on Mars. Like, it's like, where was the technological leap where like you went from pure destruction in Candyland to let us generate a space mission that will colonize Mars and like in 30 years or something like that. It's some very fast timeline, and it's just remarkable, I guess, to me. So I felt like it felt a little bit like a short story where like Cixin just had a bunch of interesting ideas, which I think he alluded to. He's like, this book is based on a dream. Like, he had a dream about like a supernova and what would happen if kids were in power. But it started but I think it's just a collection of random thoughts, almost like a vignette of like, oh, let's imagine what would happen if there was no Olympics, and what would happen if they wanted to go to Mars. Like, it just didn't connect very well to me. So, definitely one of his earlier works, so I can appreciate like what happened, but high highs and low lows.
Yeah, I definitely do agree. Just to interject, like, it definitely felt like it could have fit in a short story, at least at first, and I can see how it could be just a collection of a smattering of thoughts. Totally understand that. Let's go to John. What do you think, John?
Wow, you guys' answers were like really well reasoned and thought out. I'm gonna go very shallow then, and just say my guess. Yeah, my favorite would. I think one of the best things about the book that I really liked was I actually really liked the AI description, the massive MMO where all the children, and the way he described initially the AI and the machine, and it's processing like millions and millions of calls, and then later on all the children were able to basically have a collective voice through this AI. I'm not really sure this is I would advocate for this, but the thought that that this machine could distill millions of children's like independent thoughts and commands into generalized thought, and then independently be able to give those as a coherent message to, I don't know, someone in charge. I thought that was pretty imaginative, actually. Maybe that's the future of democracy. I have no idea, but I thought it was an interesting plot point. The worst thing about the book was having to hear about nuclear weapons being just cracked open and just throwing, I guess vodka bottles and stuff in them, and then letting them be launched thousands of miles, then landing on Earth, and then the children were able to just like crack them open and take out cookies and candy, and everything wasn't melted or broken or fine.
That's not realistic. Slow down.
It boggles the mind to me that's just such a naive thought of how intercontinental ballistic missiles actually work.
Insult to Tom's profession.
It is an insult to engineering and aerospace.
I mean, I could use an ICBM to just send you some whiskey right now in a bottle and be fine, right? totally survived liftoff, landing, just impact, right?
That's
how it works.
That's how Amazon's going to deliver our stuff in the future, right?
Oh, they all use ICBMs? Nice. Forget drones.
Nice.
Wow. Okay, let's close this out, Charlie. Your best thing and worst thing.
I mean, I'd pretty much have to agree exactly with, thanks, I forget who summed it up the best, but it's like the whole preliminary stuff with like, okay, they find out like the science behind the supernova, them setting everything up, talking about how the kids are learning their jobs, basically everything up to the Doomsday clock, where even that was like cool. I was more so just like waiting for the like, like kids are just kind of not doing, like these government kids aren't doing their job, like things are gonna get bad. But then yeah, after that, even if some of the individual stuff was kind of cool, like yeah, reading about the AI itself was actually pretty neat as like just something to read on its own. But in this book, I wanted to read about how kids got bored, that started ruining the infrastructure, that would lead to conflicts, that sort of stuff. It just seemed like every resolution and every introduction of like a new thing just felt so artificially introduced that I found it really frustrating. Because like I wanted this to feel like this is what's actually like going to happen type deal, instead it just kind of felt like he had some neat ideas and wanted to throw in some sci-fi stuff. Like, it's just like, oh, they're fighting on Antarctica, and now its kids have to leave and it's cold again. And, like, I get it all made... It, like, kind of worked within the book. I'm not saying it's all unexplained or just ass pulls or whatever. But I found it frustrating in terms of how, like, everything was linked together and some of the characterization and stuff like that. So, even though I would say I didn't not enjoy it, it wasn't like a smooth, enjoyable, like it wasn't a satisfying experience.
It was a cheap whiskey, not an expensive whiskey.
More of a cheap whiskey. Okay, well, good to know. All right, well, we're basically out of time for Supernova Era. So, of course, if anyone has any feedback or suggestions on books we should read and discuss, you can reach us at subplotofcoursepodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter at subplotpodcast. And next month, we're going to be reading Cyber Shogun Revolution, the third book in the United States of Japan series by Peter Turias. And if we're lucky, we're going to have the author with us for that episode as well. Very exciting. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Candyland! Never forget!